The gas station sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless miles of Montana wilderness. The neon lights flickered weakly, struggling against the early evening darkness. A lone van was parked by pump number 3, its driver Elena Carter calmly refueling while two large Belgian Malinois sat motionless beside her wheelchair. Their eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the surroundings with quiet intelligence. The growl of motorcycles shattered the silence. 5 bikers roared into the station, their crimson skull patches marking them as members of the Crimson Fangs. The leader, a towering brute with a scar running down his cheek, dismounted first. His leather vest read Reaper. He walked toward Elena, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. Well, look at what we have here, Reaper sneered, eyeing her wheelchair. A lost little lady with some fancy pets. Elena didn't respond. She continued fueling, her face unreadable. One of the bikers, a weary man called Hammer, circled around the van. His gaze locked onto the 2 dogs. Damn, those are some big mutts. They're not mutts, Elena said evenly. They're working dogs. Reaper smirked. Working for who? You? He let out a laugh, turning to his crew. Come on, boys. This is too easy. Hammer reached toward one of the dogs, expecting it to flinch. It didn't. Instead, Ghost moved with lightning speed. Before anyone could react, his powerful jaws snapped around Hammer's wrist, not biting, just holding. A warning. A precise, calculated movement. Hammer froze, his breath hitching. Hey, hit your damn dog off me, he yelled, his voice shaky. Reaper's smirk vanished. He stepped forward, his body tense. Call it off. Elena's fingers barely twitched. Release. Ghost let go immediately, retreating to her side like nothing had happened. But the message was clear. The bikers weren't dealing with an ordinary woman. This wasn't going to be the easy fun they had expected. And they had no idea just how bad things were about to get. Reaper's expression darkened. He didn't like surprises, and this woman had just humiliated his man without lifting a finger. He took another step forward, looming over Elena, his leather jacket creaking with the movement. You think you're tough? He asked, voice laced with mockery. Sitting there in your little chair, giving orders to your mutts. Elena met his gaze, her face calm. I think you should step back. Reaper chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, I love this. You got some nerve, lady. But out here, nerve doesn't mean shit. He turned to his men. Looks like she needs a little lesson in respect. The other bikers moved in, forming a loose semicircle around her van. The air grew heavier. Ghost and Shadow remained still, but Elena could feel their muscles coiled, their breathing steady, waiting for the command. Hammer, still nursing his wrist, spat at the ground. Let's teach this cripple some manners. He reached for the van door handle again. Wrong move. Before his fingers even touched the metal, Shadow exploded into motion. His leap was silent, precise, a blur of controlled power. In an instant, he was on top of Hammer, his jaws inches from the biker's throat, holding him down with unshakable force. Hammer didn't even have time to scream. Reaper cursed and yanked a knife from his belt, but before he could take a step, Elena spoke, her voice quiet but cutting through the chaos like steel. Stand down. The dogs froze, holding their positions perfectly. The sheer discipline of their response sent a chill through the bikers. Hammer scrambled back, panting, his face pale as he stared at the creature that had just pinned him in less than a second. What the hell are those things? One of the bikers muttered. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way Ghost and Shadow moved, the way they reacted with surgical precision, it wasn't normal. It was something far beyond normal. Reaper, however, wasn't backing down. He wasn't just some backroad thug he had seen combat before, and something about Elena was starting to click in his mind. He wasn't looking at a helpless woman in a wheelchair. He was looking at a soldier. A dangerous one. His grip on the knife tightened. All right, lady, he said slowly. You got skills, I'll give you that. But let's see what you do against a real fight. He lunged. And in that moment, with the blade flashing in the dim station light, Elena finally gave the command. Engage. The sound of the scuffle had faded, leaving only the distant hum of crickets and the soft whistle of wind through the Montana wilderness. The gas station stood eerily quiet, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. Reaper and his crew had left humiliated, but not broken. They would be back. That much was certain. Elena Carter rolled her shoulders, exhaling slowly. Adrenaline still buzzed through her veins, but she had been through worse. Much worse. She reached down and ran her fingers through Ghost's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. He was calm, as always. A perfect soldier. She turned toward the old man standing behind the counter inside the gas station. Frank Cooper, Vietnam vet, owner of this rundown little station at the edge of nowhere. He had been watching everything unfold, his sharp, weathered eyes never missing a detail. Frank stepped outside, resting his hands on his belt. Hell of a way to introduce herself to the town, he muttered. Could have gone a little softer. Elena arched an eyebrow. They started it. Frank let out a dry chuckle. That they did. He studied her for a moment, his gaze drifting to the dogs, then back to her. Military. Elena hesitated. She never liked talking about it. But Frank was an old soldier. He could see it in her posture, the way she moved, the way she didn't move unless she meant to. K9 unit, she said finally. Frank nodded. Thought so. You don't get dogs like that at a pet store. He leaned against the doorframe. You passing through, or are you sticking around? Elena glanced at her van. She had planned on moving north, getting away from everything. But something about this town, about the way Frank had looked at those bikers like he knew more than he was letting on, made her pause. I don't know yet, she admitted. Frank grunted. Well, if you're staying, you ought to know that the Crimson Fangs ain't just some road punks. They've got ties to people with real power. Elena's jaw tightened. Yeah. Who? Frank hesitated, then shook his head. Not out here. Too many years. He turned and walked back inside. Come on, I'll pour you a cup of coffee. Might as well get comfortable. Elena exhaled, then gave a short command. Heel. Ghost and Shadow fell into step beside her as she wheeled toward the station. She had planned on leaving first thing in the morning. Now, she wasn't so sure. Inside, the gas station smelled like old coffee and motor oil. A dusty radio sat on the counter, playing some forgotten country song at low volume. Elena maneuvered her wheelchair to a small table near the window while Frank poured 2 cups of coffee, his movements slow but steady. He placed one in front of her before settling into the chair opposite. So, what's your story? He asked, watching her over the rim of his cup. Elena took a sip, the bitterness grounding her. Not much to tell. Spent 12 years in the military, most of that in K9 operations. Last deployment went south. Lost a leg, got discharged. Now I train service dogs. She gestured toward Ghost and Shadow, who sat like statues beside her. They were with me overseas. The best partners I've ever had. Frank studied the dogs, nodding approvingly. I've seen war dogs before, but these two, they move different. Like they're always 5 steps ahead. Elena allowed herself a small smile. They are. Frank leaned back. You ain't just training them for service work, are you? Elena didn't answer right away. Few people understood what it took to turn a dog into a combat-ready operator. It wasn't just about obedience, it was about instinct, control, and trust so deep. It was almost telepathic. Ghost and Shadow weren't just trained, they were conditioned, molded into something beyond ordinary working dogs. Frank took her silence as confirmation. Figured as much. Saw the way they handled those bikers. That kind of discipline don't come easy. He took another sip, then set the cup down. That's why you need to be careful. The Crimson Fangs. They're small-time muscles, sure, but the people backing them, different story. The kind that don't like folks snooping around. Elena narrowed her eyes. Who's backing them? Frank hesitated, drumming his fingers against the table. Used to be this town was just another quiet place in the mountains. But a few years ago, things changed. Strange people started showing up. Government types, but not the kind that wear badges. A couple of businesses went under fast, bought out by companies nobody ever heard of. And now, folks disappear without a trace. Nobody asks questions. Elena's grip tightened around her cup. Sounds like more than just a biker gang. Frank nodded. It is. And if you stick around, you're gonna find yourself right in the middle of it. Elena glanced out the window. The road stretched into the darkness, empty and silent. She could leave in the morning, put this whole mess behind her. But deep down, she already knew the truth. She wasn't going anywhere. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small motel desk, methodically cleaning her sidearm while Ghost and Shadow lay silently beside the bed. The gas station encounter replayed in her mind, every movement, every word. Reaper and his crew weren't just thugs, they carried themselves like men who had seen real violence before. That meant they weren't going to let tonight's humiliation slide. By dawn, she had already packed up, planning to leave before trouble found her again. But trouble was fast. As she wheeled out of her room, she noticed them immediately, two bikers posted near the motel entrance, pretending not to watch her. A third sat on his bike across the lot, idly revving the engine. Scouts. They weren't just here to intimidate her. They were waiting for something, or someone. She took a slow breath. If they were watching her this closely, that meant Reaper wasn't done playing games. She weighed her options. She could head straight for the highway, try to outrun whatever was coming. Or she could send a message that she wasn't to be hunted. She chose the second option. Ghost, shadow, on me. The dogs snapped to attention, their posture shifting into readiness. Alna wheeled toward her van, purposefully ignoring the bikers. Let them make the first move. She didn't have to wait long, leaving so soon. One of them called. He was tall, muscular, with a thick beard and a jacket that bore the Crimson Fangs insignia. That's rude, lady. Reaper was hoping for a proper goodbye. Alana didn't stop moving. Tell Reaper I'm not interested. The second biker, lean and weary, stepped into her path. See, that's the problem. You don't get to say no. Alana sighed. Step aside. The weary man grinned, reaching for her wheelchair's handle. Wrong move. Ghost struck first. His body coiled like a spring before launching, his teeth clamping onto the biker's forearm. The man screamed, stumbling backward. Before he could react, Shadow lunged low, his weight slamming into the biker's legs, knocking him to the pavement. The bearded biker swore and went for his belt, probably a knife, maybe a gun. Alana didn't give him the chance. She drew her pistol and leveled it at his head. Try it. The lot fell silent except for the weary man groaning on the ground. The bearded biker hesitated, his hands frozen mid-motion. He wasn't afraid of a fight, but he wasn't stupid either. He had just seen exactly what she and her dogs could do. Tell Reaper I gave him his warning, Helena said, voice steady. Next time, I won't be so polite. She holstered her weapon and continued toward her van. Ghost and Shadow followed, their eyes locked onto the remaining biker. Message delivered. But she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Alana climbed into the van, shutting the door with deliberate calm. She checked the mirrors, both bikers were still there. The weary one groaned as he struggled to sit up, cradling his injured arm. The bearded one hadn't moved, his jaw clenched in frustration. They weren't used to losing. They wouldn't let this slide. She started the engine, the deep hum filling the silence. As she pulled out of the lot, she caught a glimpse of the bearded biker reaching for his phone. Calling for backup, no doubt. Good. Let them come. She hit the highway, heading toward the open road stretching between the mountains. The morning air was crisp, the sun barely peeking over the ridgeline. Ghost and Shadow sat alert in the back, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. They could sense it too. The hunt wasn't over. And they were right. Minutes later, the growl of motorcycles echoed behind her. 2. No, 3. The side mirror reflected the familiar crimson skulls on their vests. Reaper wasn't waiting this time. He was coming for her now. Helena tightened her grip on the wheel. She could outrun them for a while, but they'd just keep coming. She needed to end this now. She spotted an old logging road ahead, barely visible through the trees. Without hesitation, she yanked the wheel, sending the van off the highway onto the dirt path. The tires skidded, dust flying, but she controlled the slide, stabilizing as she plunged deeper into the woods. The bikers followed, their engines roaring, confident they had her cornered. They had no idea they were following her straight into a trap. She drove deeper into the trees, then suddenly slammed the brakes. The van screeched to a stop, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. The bikers were moving too fast to react properly. The first one swerved violently, his tires slipping in the dirt. The second wasn't as lucky, his bike skidded sideways, throwing him into the ground with a bone-rattling crash. The third managed to stop just in time, but by then, it was too late. Eleanor was already out of the van, weapon drawn. Ghost and Shadow leaped from the back, their movements fluid and controlled. The dust settled, revealing Reaper sitting on his bike at the front of the pack. He met her gaze, and this time, there was no smirk, no arrogance. Just a cold, calculating stare. "You got guts, lady," he said, his voice calm but edged with menace. "I'll give you that." Alana didn't lower her weapon. "And you got a death wish." For the first time, Reaper hesitated. He had underestimated her before. Now, he wasn't sure if he was making that mistake again. But one way or another, this was far from over. The air between them was razor-sharp, tension crackling like static. Reaper didn't move, his hands resting loosely on the handlebars of his bike. The two other bikers were recovering, shaking off the dust, their faces twisted with frustration. Ghost and Shadow stood like statues at Alana's side, muscles taut, eyes locked onto the enemy. They were waiting. So was she. Reaper finally exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "All right," he muttered, "I'll admit, you're not what I expected." His eyes flicked to the dogs, then back to Alana. "Military, right? Special operations?" Alana didn't answer. He smirked. "Yeah, thought so. You move like someone who's seen real action." His fingers drummed against his handlebars. "But here's the thing, you're playing a dangerous game, lady. You think this is about some little biker feud." He shook his head. "You got no idea what's really going on." Alana narrowed her eyes. "Then, why don't you enlighten me?" Reaper's smirk faded. He glanced toward the tree line as if sensing something unseen. "Not here," he said. "If we talk, it's somewhere private." Alana let out a short laugh. "You think I trust you?" Reaper sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, I don't like you, and you sure as hell don't like me, but I know when I'm in over my head. And we are in over our heads." He leaned forward slightly. "You want to know why my boys were at that gas station last night? We weren't just screwing around. We were there to keep an eye on someone. Someone important." Alana's grip on her pistol didn't loosen. "Who?" Reaper hesitated, then spoke two words that made her blood run cold. "Federal agent." A chill crept up Alana's spine. "You killed him?" Reaper's face darkened. "No, someone else got to him first." The woods felt suddenly smaller, the shadows stretching longer. Something was very, very wrong. And for the first time, Alana had the sinking feeling that Reaper wasn't her biggest problem. Alana's mind raced. If a federal agent had been killed, this wasn't just about a biker gang throwing its weight around. This was something bigger, something darker. She kept her pistol steady, eyes locked on Reaper. "Who killed him?" Reaper glanced at the downed biker still groaning in the dirt, then back at her. "I don't know. We were tracking him, making sure he didn't get too close to certain operations." He leaned in slightly. "But when we found him, someone had already done the job. And it wasn't a clean kill either. It was professional, military professional." Alana's grip tightened. "Why was he here?" Reaper smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Same reason you are, I'm guessing." Poking his nose where it didn't belong, he flicked his eyes toward the highway. "Look, you think my boys are the bad guys here, but we're just small time compared to what's happening in this town. The business is shutting down, the disappearances, the new faces rolling in without a trace. That agent was onto something. And now he's dead." Alana didn't lower her gun, but she was listening. Every instinct in her told her Reaper wasn't lying. She had seen enough in her years of service to recognize when someone was genuinely afraid. And right now, Reaper was terrified. "You're telling me someone's cleaning house?" she asked. Reaper nodded. "And whatever's happening, it's way above my pay grade." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't know what game you're playing, lady, but if you stick around, you're gonna end up just like that agent." Alana finally lowered her weapon. Not out of trust, out of calculation. If what he was saying was true, then this town was more dangerous than she had thought. And she wasn't about to run. "Not yet. I don't scare easy," she said. Reaper chuckled dryly. "Yeah, figured that out." He motioned to his men. "Let's go. This mess is bigger than us." As the bikers pulled away, Alana stood in the dust, watching them disappear into the trees. The wind had shifted. The fight she thought she was in wasn't the real battle. Something else was lurking beneath the surface. And she was going to find out what. Alana climbed back into her van, her mind running through every possibility. A dead federal agent, military-style execution, a biker gang scared out of their minds. Whatever was happening in this town, it wasn't just crime, it was a cover-up. And if Reaper was right, she was already on someone's radar. She drove back toward town, keeping an eye on her mirrors. No bikers, no tail. But the unease in her gut didn't fade. She pulled into Frank's gas station, the only place that felt remotely safe right now. Frank was inside, wiping down the counter like he hadn't seen a thing, but when she entered, he shot her a look. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She dropped into the chair across from him. "Maybe I have." She hesitated, then said, "You ever hear about a Fed sniffing around?" Frank's hand stilled for a fraction of a second before he resumed cleaning. "Depends who's asking. Elena Carter," she said. "And I don't like being left in the dark." Frank sighed, setting the rag down. "Yeah, I heard about him. Young guy. Smart. Came through asking too many questions. Next thing I know, he's gone." He met her eyes. Didn't think much of it at first. People disappear all the time when they ask the wrong questions. She leaned in. What was he after? Frank exhaled. "There's an old facility up in the mountains. Used to be a government site, but it's been abandoned for years. Or at least, that's what they want you to think. I don't know what's up there, but whatever it is, that Fed wanted to find out." Elena's pulse quickened. "And now he's dead." Frank nodded grimly. "And if you're smart, you'll let it go." But Elena wasn't smart. Not when it came to walking away from something that smelled like a mission. She sat back, her decision already made. She was going to that facility. And she was going to find out the truth. The mountain road was rough, winding through dense pines, the kind of path that barely existed on a map. Elena had driven on worse terrain before, but something about this place felt different. Too quiet. Even the birds had gone silent. Ghost and Shadow sat alert in the back, ears twitching at every subtle noise. They could sense it too, something was off. Frank had given her directions, a rough idea of where the so-called abandoned facility was. But even he didn't know exactly what was up there. That was what made it dangerous. Elena kept her pistol within reach as she maneuvered deeper into the wilderness. Then, she saw it. A rusted chain-link fence, barely standing, with a weathered government property, no trespassing sign half buried in dirt. Beyond it, the remnants of a military compound loomed, concrete walls, overgrown with ivy, a few guard towers still standing like skeletons against the sky. She killed the engine, scanning the area. No movement, no patrols. Either the place really was abandoned, or someone was doing a damn good job staying hidden. She climbed out, motioning for the dogs to follow. They moved like shadows, sticking close but constantly scanning their surroundings. Elena approached the fence, testing the metal. It crumbled like dead leaves. No electricity, no reinforcements. Whatever had been here before, it wasn't anymore. Or so it seemed. As she stepped forward, her boot hit something solid beneath the grass. A pressure plate. She froze. Ghost let out a low growl, confirming what she already knew. This place wasn't abandoned. Someone had booby-trapped it. Elena's pulse stayed steady. Think. If they wanted intruders dead instantly, it would have been rigged with explosives. This wasn't that kind of trap, it was an alarm. A silent alert to whoever was watching. And now, someone knew she was here. She exhaled slowly, stepping back off the plate, careful not to trigger it fully. Time to move. Whatever was in that facility, she had just announced her arrival. And whoever was inside, they were coming. Elena moved fast, slipping behind a collapsed section of the fence, keeping low. Ghost and Shadow mirrored her movements, their training impeccable. Whoever had set that trap wouldn't come charging out, guns blazing. They would watch first, assess the threat. That meant she had minutes, maybe seconds, to take control of the situation. She scanned the facility. The main building was a squat, brutalist structure, its thick concrete walls showing signs of age but not abandonment. Security cameras. None that she could see. But that didn't mean they weren't there. The real danger wasn't outside. It was inside. A sound. Soft. A shuffle of movement from the second floor window. Someone was there. Watching. Waiting. Elena exhaled, steadying her breathing. No point in retreating now. She had already stepped into the lion's den. The only way out was through. She signaled to the dogs with a silent gesture. Advance. Moving like ghosts, they slipped through the overgrown grass, hugging the facility's perimeter. The side entrance was rusted, the hinges barely holding. She tested the handle. Unlocked. That was never a good sign. She pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and something else chemicals. The scent hit her instantly, familiar in a way she didn't like. Military-grade disinfectants, the kind used in biohazard zones. Ghost let out the faintest growl. He smelled it too. Something had happened here. Something bad. Elena moved deeper into the hallway, her footsteps silent. The walls were lined with old observation windows, most covered in grime. But one was clear enough to see through. What she saw made her stomach tighten. Kennels. Dozens of them. All empty now, but the reinforced steel and claw marks on the walls told her exactly what they had held. Dogs. Military working dogs. But these weren't normal kennels. They were containment cells. A chill ran through her. This wasn't just a facility. It was a lab. And whatever they had been doing here, it wasn't over. Elena clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. This wasn't just an abandoned government site, it was an experimental facility. The claw marks, the reinforced kennels, the lingering scent of chemicals, everything pointed to one thing: genetic modification, behavioral enhancement, the kind of black-budget projects the military didn't talk about. And if the feds had sent an agent to investigate, that meant someone had restarted whatever nightmare had begun here. Ghost and Shadow tensed beside her. They sensed something. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shift in the air. Elena didn't question it. She stepped back, pressing herself against the wall, pistol ready. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming down the hallway. Not rushing, not sneaking. Moving with the confidence of someone who knew they owned the space. Elena stayed perfectly still, breath controlled. Ghost and Shadow were statues, waiting for her command. The steps stopped just beyond the corner. A shadow stretched against the dimly lit wall. Whoever it was, they knew she was here. Then, a voice. Smooth. Measured. You shouldn't have come here. Elena didn't respond. Wait. Observe. Control the situation. The man took another step, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of tactical vest, sidearm, military boots. Not some random thug. This was a professional. I know what you're thinking, the man continued, voice calm. That this is some deep state experiment gone wrong. That you've uncovered a secret the world isn't supposed to see. A pause. But you don't know the half of it. Elena's grip on her pistol didn't waver. Then, why don't you enlighten me? The man chuckled, stepping fully into view. Sharp features, dark eyes, a scar running down his temple. He wasn't holding his weapon, but that meant nothing. Guys like this didn't need a gun to be dangerous. I would, he said, tilting his head slightly. But you're already out of time. Elena's instincts flared. Move, now. She dove left just as gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the air where she had stood. Ghost and Shadow launched forward, their movements so fast they were a blur. The hunt had begun. And Elena wasn't the prey. She was the predator. Gunfire ripped through the air, bullets sparking off the metal walls as Elena rolled behind a crate for cover. The man with the scar, whoever the hell he was, moved like a trained operator, his shots precise, controlled. Not a mercenary. Not a common thug. This was someone who had been forged in Black Ops. Someone who knew how to kill fast and clean. But so did she. Ghost and Shadow were already in motion. Shadow took the right flank, a blur of muscle and speed, while Ghost went low, circling behind their attacker. The man barely had time to react before Shadow struck, his powerful frame slamming into his side, knocking him off balance. Elena seized the opening. She snapped up from cover, squeezing the trigger. 2 shots. Center mass. The man staggered, grunting in pain, but he didn't go down. His vest took the brunt of it, absorbing most of the impact. Damn it. He was wearing high-grade armor. That meant body shots wouldn't stop him. She adjusted. Before he could recover, she fired again, this time aiming for the knee. The bullet tore through flesh, and the man collapsed with a snarl of pain. But even on the ground, he was dangerous. His hand moved toward his belt, a grenade. Ghost. Now, Ghost lunged, his teeth clamping down on the man's wrist just as he pulled the pin. The attacker let out a strangled yell, struggling against the dog's iron grip. The grenade slipped from his fingers, rolling across the floor. Tick. Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed the attacker by his vest and yanked him back, dragging both of them behind a steel table. Boom. The explosion rocked the room, shrapnel slicing through the air. Dust and smoke filled the hallway, momentarily blinding them. Elena coughed, shaking off the ringing in her ears. Had to move. Fast. She reached for her pistol, but before she could fire, the man surged forward, his knife flashing in the dim light. Elena barely dodged the first swipe. The second came fast, catching her sleeve, slicing fabric. She countered, driving her elbow into his throat. He stumbled, but he didn't go down. This bastard was tough. Ghost and Shadow circled, waiting for an opening. But Elena didn't wait. She pressed forward, striking hard. A palm to the nose. A kick to the ribs. But he absorbed it, countering with a brutal hook to her ribs. Pain flared through her side, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to fall. He grinned, bloody but still standing. Not bad, he rasped, but not good enough. Then, from the smoke, another figure appeared. And Elena realized this fight was far from over. Elena barely had time to react before the second attacker lunged. This one was bigger, faster, moving with the kind of precision that only came from years of combat training. Not just another thug, this was a soldier. She twisted, narrowly avoiding a blade aimed straight for her throat. The man's momentum carried him forward, but instead of stumbling, he adapted, pivoting smoothly, already preparing his next strike. Ghost and Shadow reacted instantly. Shadow went for the legs, aiming to take him down, while Ghost launched for the arm holding the knife. But this man was prepared. With a brutal efficiency that sent alarms through Elena's mind, he twisted at the last second, using Shadow's momentum against him, sending the dog skidding across the concrete floor. At the same time, he drove his forearm into Ghost's side, knocking him away before the bite could land. Too fast. Too controlled. Elena's instinct screamed at her this wasn't just any operator. This was someone who had trained in the same kind of combat she had. The man smirked, stepping closer. "You're good," he admitted, rolling his shoulders. "But you're not the only one with war dogs." A sharp whistle cut through the air. And then from the darkness came the growls. Elena's stomach dropped as she saw them emerge. Two massive canines, their eyes locked onto her like laser sights. Not wild. Trained. Enhanced. Their muscles too defined, their movements too precise. Ghost and Shadow tensed beside her, recognizing the threat instantly. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was a war. The soldier grinned. "Let's see whose dogs are better." Then he snapped his fingers. The attack came in a blur. One of the enhanced dogs launched at her, faster than any normal canine should be. She barely had time to roll aside before its jaws snapped shut, inches from her face. Ghost intercepted, crashing into the beast midair, the two animals tumbling in a vicious struggle. Shadow engaged the second attacker, their bodies a whirlwind of muscle and fangs. Elena had no time to process because the soldier was already on her. He struck hard, his fist colliding with her ribs, sending her stumbling back. She recovered fast, blocking his next hit and countering with a brutal elbow to his throat. He coughed but didn't stop. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Elena gritted her teeth. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about winning. Elena shifted her stance, analyzing every movement of her opponent. He wasn't just fast, he was precise, controlled, calculating. Every strike was meant to disable, every step designed to corner her. A specialist. She had fought men like him before, in places where rules didn't exist and failure meant death. But she wasn't about to lose. He threw a punch aimed at her throat. She ducked, twisted her hips, and drove a knee straight into his ribs. A solid hit. He grunted but rolled with impact, recovering too quickly. Damn it. He was tough. Behind her, the battle of the dogs raged on. Ghost had locked his jaws onto the enhanced dog's throat, but the beast refused to go down. It twisted violently, slamming Ghost into the wall, forcing him to release. Shadow was locked in a brutal struggle with the second canine, their snarls mixing with the chaos of the fight. The soldier smirked. "You're good, but not good enough." Elena didn't respond. She acted. She feinted left, drawing him in. Then at the last second, she dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him. He crashed to the floor, but before he could recover, she was on him. A brutal elbow to the face. A second. A third. Blood splattered, but his resistance didn't fade. This man was trained to endure pain. Fine. She grabbed the knife strapped to his vest and drove it straight into his shoulder. His body jerked, his hands twitching toward the wound. That was all the distraction she needed. She ripped the knife free and slammed the hilt into his temple. His body went slack, unconscious. Elena didn't waste time. She turned just in time to see Ghost and Shadow finally gain the upper hand. Shadow had driven his opponent into the ground, teeth buried deep in its neck. The enhanced dog let out one final snarl before going still. Ghost, bloodied but standing, circled his fallen opponent, watching for movement. Elena exhaled, heart pounding. It was over. Or so she thought. A faint beeping filled the air. She turned sharply the soldier's vest. A blinking red light. A detonator. Her blood ran cold. He hadn't come here to win. He had come to bury the truth. Elena bolted. Ghost. Shadow. Move. The explosion tore through the facility as she sprinted toward the exit. Flames erupted, metal twisted, concrete cracked. The entire building began to collapse. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just ran. Elena hit the ground hard as the shockwave from the explosion sent her rolling across the dirt. Heat licked at her back, the air thick with smoke and debris. She coughed, pushing herself up, her ears ringing from the blast. She had made it out. Barely. Ghost and Shadow emerged from the dust, their coats streaked with ash but otherwise unharmed. Their eyes locked onto her, waiting for a command. Always ready, loyal to the end. She forced herself to stand, looking back at the remains of the facility. Gone. The building had caved in on itself, flames devouring whatever secrets had been buried there. If there had been any evidence left of what they were doing, it was now reduced to ashes. Or so they wanted her to think. She turned sharply at the sound of an engine. A motorcycle. Reaper. He pulled up, his face unreadable as he took in the destruction. Damn, he muttered, kicking down the stand. Guess you found what you were looking for. Elena wiped the soot from her face. Not everything. Reaper let out a short laugh. Yeah, well, ain't nobody gonna find anything now. He gestured to the burning wreckage. Whoever was running this show just hit the reset button. Elena didn't respond. She knew the truth. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. She glanced at Ghost and Shadow. They had survived wars, ambushes, and now this. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. Reaper watched her for a moment before sighing. You're not gonna let this go, are you? Elena shook her head. No. He smirked, revving his engine. Didn't think so. Then, without another word, he sped off into the night, disappearing down the highway. Elena stood there for a long time, watching the last remnants of the facility burn. Somewhere in the wreckage, the truth was still buried, and she was going to dig it up. Elena burst through the collapsing doorway just as the shockwave hit. The force sent her sprawling, her body slamming against the dirt. Heat scorched her back, the roar of fire deafening as debris rained down. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself up. No time to stop. She turned Ghost. Shadow. Both dogs emerged from the smoke, their bodies covered in dust and blood but still moving. Relief surged through her, but they weren't safe yet. The explosion had triggered a chain reaction, the ground beneath them trembling as the facility continued to crumble. They had to get out, now. She pushed forward, lungs burning, ignoring the ache in her limbs. Trees blurred past as she ran, every instinct screaming at her to keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the edge of the forest. Only then did she turn, breathing ragged. The facility, or what was left of it, was gone. A smoldering crater remained, thick smoke curling into the sky. Everything inside had been erased. She clenched her fists. That had been the plan all along. Whoever had been running that place hadn't just been experimenting on more dogs. They had been hiding something much bigger. And now, the evidence was gone. Ghost let out a low growl. Not at the ruins, at something else. Elena followed his gaze. A figure stood at a distance near the tree line, just barely visible through the haze. Watching. Not running. Not attacking. Just observing. Her jaw tightened. The soldier she had fought, or someone like him. She couldn't see his face, but she knew the truth. This wasn't over, and they wanted her to know it. Then, just as silently as he had appeared, he vanished into the trees. Elena exhaled slowly, her heart still pounding. She wasn't naive enough to think she had won. This was just the beginning.